So when things are going right, the market operates. It allocates the scarce resources effectively, right? But what if the market on its own doesn't allocate resources effectively? Or efficiently? And here's the important part. In a way that balances social costs and benefits and to be clear, externalities are just one type. If the firms are required to pay the actual social costs, they create less pollution, but also less of the product and charge a higher price, as we saw over here, right? They charge a higher price than before, and they're producing less than before. So there's a couple of different ways to correct for these market failures. One of the more traditional ways is called the command and control regulation. So this is essentially the existence of laws that specify the amount of pollution and they also might detail which pollution controlling technologies one might use. So these are often specific or detailed. One of my favorite examples of talking about government intervention and regulation and the positives and benefits of it, but also the drawbacks of it, is to talk about sawdust mills. Have I talked to you guys? Have I ranted to you about sawdust mills yet? Okay, cool. So back in the day, right, we had these, big, lumber mills, and they were, located on the water, right? They needed water to run the saws and do all other kinds of stuff. But then when they had all this sawdust and these small pieces of wood that they weren't using in the actual 2x4s or whatever building materials, they just put it in the river. Well, then the village down the stream or the city down the stream or whatever, all of a sudden all the fish are dead, right? So the government, was like, oh, there's a negative externality here between the people that are buying wood and the people that are producing wood. Then we got, Joe Fisherman down the river 50 miles, and he's being impacted. How are we going to fix this? So instead of coming in and being very specific and detailed, right, and saying you have to do it a certain way, right, they just came in and they said, hey, you can't do this anymore. Stop putting this stuff in the rivers, right? They didn't tell them exactly what to do with it. They just said, cut it out. So at first, the lumber companies were paying for people to come and remove it, just like we do with our trash, right? But this was also the time when plastics and glue were really making headway in terms of material science, right? So there was this new glue that you could superheat, and so some entrepreneur was like, I bet I could make something out of that sawdust and those little pieces of board and those little pieces of wood. And that's how particle board was made. Was somebody seeing this essentially free material and this new technological advance and being like, oh, I could put those two together and make a valuable product. So again, it wasn't like the government came in and said, you have to burn all the sawdust, or you have to bury all the sawdust, or you have to, you know, whatever, put it all in a silo or something like that, right? They just said, you can't do this anymore. You can't put it in the river anymore. You got to figure out something else to do with it. And the market and the incentives, the profit incentives and innovation and entrepreneurship helped to not only fix the problem, but create a new building material. So again, just a cool little story that kind of shows that not all government regulation ends badly, and there are ways to do government regulation that can be very overly proscriptive, right? They can be like, you know, they tell you what to do, and then 5 years later we learn that like, oh, that actually wasn't the right thing to do. It actually caused more of a kerfuffle to try to fix it.
So wouldn't that scenario then be because of regulatory capture?
Not necessarily. That could just happen just due to ineptitude, just due to us like not knowing, you know what I mean? The fact that like we could just be like, this seems like the best idea right now. But if we prescribe that idea, the other thing too that happens in government a lot is inertia, right? So it's like once something happens, it doesn't get changed. And so the more that you can, the less you can specify, in my opinion, the less you can specify in these regulations and the more you can allow the free market to flourish in those situations while also protecting the people that are impacted by the negative externality, the better. But that could happen because of regulatory capture, but it also could just happen just because of straight up just we didn't know, you know? Sometimes we just have the best of intentions, and then there's a bunch of unintended consequences that happen when we put policies in a large scale. So that's a very good question. So command and control requires